Welcome. This is the podcast series on living a revenue culture. Long-term business survival is about maximizing profits. And the only way to accomplish maximize profits is first accomplish a optimized people first culture. And so in this podcast series, we bring you people who have great histories, great stories, and they're willing to share with you on how all that works. Today, we have David Cichelli with us, and David is the author of a new book, Revenue Growth Model, the Chief Revenue Officer Guide. And as you know, those of us at the Revenue Game are big fans on people learning how to be chief revenue officers and how to think that way. So we're just thrilled to have David with us. David's been with the Alexander Group, which I had the pleasure to do some work with a number of years ago, and have been a big fan of their work for a long time. He's a revenue growth advisor there. He's also authored other books. He's done lots of presentations, white papers, written articles, and he's done lots of very significant client work over the last few years. David, welcome.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to join your podcast audience too. So thanks for making this available for us.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited, and I'd love to have you start with telling us about the book and how the book and the work from being in the Alexander Group for all these years, how that kind of came together. I assume there's a relationship there.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking the question. So to put it in the context, the Alexander Group is a revenue growth consulting firm. So that's a management consulting firm that deals with the issues of sales success. Now, what we do is frequently when we show up, we don't have an answer. We have a process. And the process is, what are you trying to accomplish? What type of customers are you trying to call on? What type of channels do you need? What are you saying to those customers? What's going to be the right headcount and deployment? And how are we going to measure people? How are we going to enable them? And then what's the leadership role? And then, of course, what's our sales operations team doing? So having the benefit of working that bus line for many years, getting off at various stops along the way as we've worked with clients. And sometimes the issue is huge. They just have damaged their sales organization. The vice president of sales is under enormous pressure. And the question is, why aren't we getting the revenue growth that we think we should be getting? Other times they have just challenges. They have challenges having to do with a specific program. It might be like the sales compensation program isn't functioning correctly, or our onboarding process is not occurring correctly. And so having assembled all of those intersections and concepts, we group them into a model we call the revenue growth model. And its pictorial representation is on the top, you have leadership. And I have some points of view about that I'd like to share eventually. And then you have these like what we call 9 pillars. And these are these points of competency that we would expect the sales organization or a revenue team, which we'd like to call it, to be able to address. And those points of competency include knowing how to do revenue segmentation, knowing how to prepare value propositions for your customer contact people, knowing who's going to do what when, and we're going to call that engagement emotions. And then how are we going to divide our workforce up into channels, direct or indirect, and what are the roles of our channel partners? And then we're going to have an organizational structure. And I'm not talking about a map with pins in it. I'm talking about all the way from when do we first contact the customer or they contact us? How do they engage with us? When do they make their important decision? When do they need guidance? And then how do we make sure that deal is closed and then eventually give them the customer support and then renew that revenue if that possibility exists? And then the next few pillars include sizing and deployment. So what's the head count? Interesting question is posed right now. If the customer knows your product really well, what's the role of the salesperson? And what should the head count be in reflection of when your customer becomes highly informed? And then there's the things that we worry about day in and day out. How do we hire the right people? How do we enable them? How do we onboard them? And then, of course, a sales organization, a revenue team is a big, huge metrics organization. There is tracking, and there's a lot of tools for doing that. And then we have our performance and rewards. And these are all the tools associated with managing the workforce, the first line supervisor, the performance management programs. And then we have our very important lieutenants, our revenue operations group. So knowing that we've worked that waterfront year after year after year, a pattern emerges about what are the points of competency that you need in each of those things. So basically what the book reflects is what we've learned working with clients. And you might say, well, is there one way to do segmentation? No, there's multiple ways to do segmentation.
Yeah.
So is there only one buyer journey? No, there are multiple types of buyer journeys. So the book is actually sort of the accumulation of our knowledge over the last 35 years. And of course, everything's always evolving and changing, but we think we've come up with some pretty good tools that a chief revenue officer can say, am I doing these things well? And of course, some of them have a long wavelength, like segmentation. You're not going to be doing that on a monthly basis, but you need to do it eventually so that you make sure you're steering your organization in the right direction. And then we just have our day-to-day pressing issues. Like, for example, I just recently did a study and I asked the question, do you have open positions? Now, I asked that question. I've been asking that question for 20 years. I do a sales effectiveness survey on a regular basis. And right now we see a peak in open positions. I mean, the sales organization is missing headcount. Now, I'm not using the word great resignation, and I'm not using the word, things like, labor shortages, but we do have a shortage of salespeople right at this point in time. And that means we got to focus on that. So some of the things we used to do, and Rick, maybe you remember some of these. We used to have jobs known as sales associates. These were people on the bench. You were getting them ready for when a territory became open. Well, having more than 5%. So my results suggested that over 55% of the companies have 6% of their positions or more open. So the point being is whether we're doing strategic work, which we want our chief revenue officer doing, or we're doing very tactical things like hiring people, this is a big organ, like in a church with all those different layers of keys and the pedals and everything. We got a lot of things we got to be working on. And we want our chief revenue officer to have the full vision of how to be able to manage this most critical function in the company. So the book reflects that, and it's our most current thinking in this space. And we're really proud of how it turned out. And of course, the contributions came in from hundreds of our consultants and their client work. And I'm really impressed by the types of things that clients think about and the types of solutions that we bring them. And it's all in the book.
David, as I'm listening, and correct me if I'm off base, but it sounds like you help provide a context for how to approach revenue.
Yeah. So it's like having a roadmap. Otherwise, and this is a leadership challenge. Otherwise, the chief revenue officer, and I want to define that in a minute, is plagued by emails from product management, emails from the field, and there's sort of this almost sometimes, unfortunately, whale watching behavior. You're like, oh my God, there's a problem off the port, and everything runs over there. And then you go, oh my gosh, there's a problem with Salesforce.com. We all run over there. And we start losing sight of the bigger picture. And that's really what we would like. As you said, Rick, we would like our chief revenue officer to have a much more studied view about what they're supposed to be doing. And I'll tell you something, it's kind of interesting. We have this sort of mortality, and I'm going to come back to the VP of sales, but we have this mortality of revenue officers or vice presidents of sales that get all of a sudden terminated when the growth rate drops below 10%. And you go, why? I mean, they were heroes. They were successful. The company was growing. And then all of a sudden the revenue drops below 10% and the revenue team is blamed for it. Okay. So, and of course, the number one cause of that is saturation. And the solution to that is redefining buyer populations and segments, because there's a huge amount of business still out there. We're just not getting at it. And that's why we want our chief revenue officer, to your point, Rick, to have a broader framework, a broader platform to think about this. I don't want them to be a victim of saying, Dave has decided to seek opportunities elsewhere, spend more time with his family. I mean, that's you've seen those announcements, haven't you?
Yeah, I think I even was written about that way once. Uh,
It's a challenge, but go ahead.
this is a great conversation. When we talk to people about chief revenue officers, oftentimes their answer, a chief revenue officer used to be a vice president of sales and marketing. Now we combined them and we have a chief revenue officer. Is that your definition of a chief revenue officer?
Great question. So here's, I have to borrow a term for marketing, which tends to cause salespeople to roll their eyes. And the term is buyer journey. And most salespeople go, yeah, okay, that sounds like something out of marketing. But if I reposition that as a sales imperative, and I redefine it as saying the customer is being touched multiple times, and they show up at our website, they are engaged by some people. Who are they in the social media? I'm not sure what they're saying to them. Then they end up in the sales department, maybe, or they come in through the account manager. And then we have this service function. So those silo activities of marketing and business development and the sales development reps and all that sort of stuff in some, I'm not sure what department they're in. And then we have our customers success people. Are they part of the service organization? Is there additional revenue, particularly with these continuing contracts? So our chief revenue officer needs to see the entire picture. And underneath that chassis, now, this is a personal challenge for all of us. When most sales leaders think about their sales organization, they think about people. They think about their jobs.
Yeah.
And we've got to stop doing that for a moment. And one of the healthiest ways to do that is just pretend nothing existed. Now ask the question, where do customers come from? How can we engage with them? What are they doing on the website? Who's responsible for interacting with them? What is a marketing qualified lead? What is a sales qualified lead? Who says what to the customer when? So now we have a broad, and it really gets laid out in a graphic, in terms of landing, expanding, and retaining customers. So what we need is a new tool set for our chief revenue officer that says, I'm responsible for every touch point of the customer population that's going to produce revenue for us, because otherwise it's convoluted. Now, I don't know if the VP of sales stays where they are and then they report to the chief revenue officer, but I would like to see if it's a vice president of sales to raise their hand and say, please give me responsibility for the entire contact continuum of those customers as they flow through. So short answer to the question, a chief revenue officer needs to be responsible for all revenue potential interactions with a customer, whether that's on social media, whether that's at the e-commerce site, whether that's with a salesperson, whether that's with a customer service person or a customer success manager. And that way they're managing that pipeline of revenue that's flowing through. And it's remarkable because that's one of the challenges we find with our VPs of sales is they are criticized for having blindfolds on, or they become territorial about, well, the credit belongs to the salesperson, even though the customer ordered it on the e-commerce site. So all of a sudden now we have an argument going on that's not healthy. Okay.
Yeah. Fascinating. And well, I don't even know where to start with this. In a lot of the work we've done, we even find that the customer is impacted by, of course, pricing and contracting and what product development has for, the life cycle of a particular product line. Mm-hmm. And, the chief revenue officer needs to have some input into those things as well. Yeah. Because if they're done poorly, there's a point at which the sales team can't overcome them.
That's exactly right. And so, taking us back to product management, which is, I love product management. They're creative, but sometimes they get going on SKUs and all of a sudden they got a zillion versions of the product. And then with all due respect, the worst behavior that they have is what I call mortar launching, in which they take a product, haven't talked to anybody, put it in a mortar tube, launch it into the sales department, turn away, they don't get any flash. And they say, well, the sales department didn't sell my product. Wait a second, or they throw in a whole bunch of contests and spiffs and things like that. That's very dysfunctional. So I'm like you. I think so. The planning tool that I think is the strongest planning tool is what's called revenue segment planning. And I didn't say market segment planning, and I didn't say sales segment planning. Sales segments would be your pyramid with large accounts, medium size. Revenue segment planning is the intersect of really three truths. One is, what is the product? What is the buyer population? And what is the access methodology? So if I take any business, I can divide it into those populations. And therefore, when a product manager says we want to sell something, I'll say, okay, what is the buyer population? What is the product and its value proposition for that buyer population? And what is the correct access methodology? So rather than product managers getting frustrated, feeling that their product is not being supported, I believe very strongly in this planning engine up front that says, okay, let's get together. We got product management, we got finance, because we've got to make sure we make money at this. And we've got the chief revenue officer who he or she has her own strategy planning function. And, that's really shocking. What do you mean? There's somebody in the revenue organizations that's responsible for sizing markets, describing our ability to access those markets. And really, before we start rushing salespeople with variety of contests and quarterly pushes and stuff like that, we have a game plan, a plan that the chief revenue officer manages based upon the population of revenue segments.
Again, this is, you and I should have a whole day for this podcast because there's so much to cover. But as I'm listening, one of the things for years, we were in the consulting business almost 15 years before we would do strategy work. Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't do strategy work, not because we didn't have a bunch of advanced degrees and hadn't been through strategy, but every time somebody said strategy, I had 5 friends who were strategy gurus.
Yeah.
Different. And somehow if there's 5 perfect different ways, I don't think there's a perfect way. And finally, one day I was doing a talk in Quebec, and I don't know why all of a sudden I knew the answer to strategy. And the answer to strategy was most business strategies did not include a revenue strategy.
Yes.
And I believe a revenue strategy is a very specific thing.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
So all of a sudden now I knew why I didn't like most of the business strategies, because all they did is set budgets and then set goals and then said, go get them.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes comment about this. So a lot of PE firms come to us and say, we bought this company and we did everything we could. We tightened up their supply chain. We, stripped out businesses they should be, but they're not growing. So even these vaulted PE firms are just blanked out when they go, well, how do I get the revenue engine going? Unfortunately, that's sometimes where we have the death rate of our VP of sales, unfortunately. But the point is that there's a set of tools for managing revenue opportunity. And the concept of revenue segmentation is like, what does that mean? Well, there are populations of customers. So and it's really the flag that goes up that goes like this: business units organize around products. The revenue team organizes around buyer populations. And that competency of being able to do that is a strategy piece of work. That's why we want to have our revenue leader with a staff function that's planning which hill we're going to take, which battle we're going to fight, and how much money we're going to put up against it. And then we negotiate or discuss with the product divisions about the allocations of resources against those buyer populations.
That is so spot on. Undergraduate, I was trained as a cost accountant. Yeah. So even though I'm a lifetime salesperson, when I look at these kinds of things, I realize I only have so many hours or so many people
Yeah.
or so many resources. You can't
You,
design around products because the products can go infinite places.
yeah.
As a seller, I've got to focus the resources I have on the customers that I have access to so that I can transfer the most value to them so they pay me the most value in return.
Exactly right. So not to be political here, one of the things we ask the product divisions to do is before you bring it to us at the sales function, the revenue function, write and prepare your value proposition and then go try to sell it. I know that sounds mean-spirited. It's not meant to be, but
No.
go out with salespeople and try the pitch, because the sales, if you don't have a good story that connects with the buyer population, the product's gonna stall. So we like to see, our product management people engaged with our revenue team and a more open, let's try it. Let's do a pilot with this. And give us the collateral, give us the website, give us the value proposition, give us the return on investment, and lifetime ownership value, blah blah blah. And let's go see if it works. And I'll tell you, the marketing people, the product management people actually appreciate it. They go, "Oh my God, I guess that didn't hook, did it?" Or, "Wow, that really hooked." That was really a very powerful message.
That's, I'm just smiling ear to ear because for 12 years, that's what we did.
Yeah.
And we were, in the late 80s and through the year 2000, our clients were Siemens and Philips and Johnson & Johnson and AT&T. Yeah. They created really cool stuff in their product groups, and then they were frustrated because nobody would buy it.
Yes.
So what we did is we came in and said, look, we'll work with you to create, as you use the term pitch, we'll create the offer that the market gets to receive.
Yes.
And then we'll audit for you. Do you have the infrastructure to get that offer into the market? And if you pass the infrastructure test, then we'll take it to real buyers.
Yes.
And we'll go through this conversation. And particularly if you're working for Siemens and you call somebody and say, hey, Siemens would like to have a meeting with the CIO, of course they take the meeting.
Yeah.
But the conversation was, you're our poster child. Siemens thinks you're the poster child for this offer. We want to explain it to you before we finish it. Because if we're missing something, we can add that in before we're done.
Yeah, exactly right.
And the buyers were always nice because we were working for big famous companies. But at the end, our question was, well, you've been very nice. You've said you like this thing. Would you want to be an early adopter? Now, when we asked that question, all of a sudden, if they did want to be an early adopter, they're going, yes, yes, yes. And if they didn't, we heard the real objections to what the offer was. And
so you were pre-testing the product and working with a potential buyer to identify the right value proposition.
Yes.
And if you didn't have it right, you corrected it. You learned what was not resonating with the customer. So Rick, let me ask you this question. Let me just say, I'm listening to this podcast. I'm the VP of sales. It sounds like you're doing marketing. It's not in my department. What's the answer to that question?
Well, the answer is what you said earlier, that we believe revenue generation is organization-wide. Revenue generation is about transferring value from the seller to the buyer. And it requires every single solitary human being on the seller side to create maximum value.
Yeah.
If finance doesn't understand what we're doing, they won't price it correctly. They won't go legal and create the right terms and conditions in the contract.
Exactly.
So we believe that it is an organization-wide activity. It's driven from a buyer's frame of reference backwards. They're the only ones who can validate our offer in monetized terms.
Got it. So I'm reflecting. So many of our clients, many of our clients are the VP of sales or the chief revenue officer. And you look at the history of a VP of sales, they usually have come up through the sales organization. And my ambition for them is to not just be a better regional manager at the national level. Okay.
Right.
So that means they have to recharter themselves, and they may even have to sell that to their executive committee. And I'm a fan of that, that they step up and say, I'm here to ensure that we have open pipelines of revenue flowing to the organization. And instead of talking about a compensation program or getting a new training thing, I want that chief revenue officer to stand up like he's at the Pentagon. He says, we got a lot of resources here. We got a lot of potential targets. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to help us focus on what the most viable opportunities are. And I want to give confidence to our product divisions that we can handle their products. But but they need to be tested, and
Yes.
value propositions need to be created before we put them out into the field. Otherwise, we could have, a misfire out there. So
Right.
I guess the commentary is, if you're in search of the title chief revenue officer, it is not a super regional manager now becoming the vice president, and now you're taking on the national sales meeting. That's not the job. The job is much bigger than that. And you might have to be your own advocate, your own sort of, missionary statement person that says, here's the charter, and what I find that, and this is true of all career types of things, people yield to competency. Okay. And if you show up and you're competent, not political, but competent, saying, we are going to have a way of analyzing buyer populations. We're going to have a flow through from our digital engagement into our sales organization when appropriate, into our service organization. We're going to map that out. We're going to have a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, and a 5-year plan. We're going to be actively engaged with product management. You know what? The executive committee says, finally, somebody who sees the big picture. What's your sense, Rick?
Well, I completely agree with that. The one piece I'd add that I think we have been trained over the last 40 or 50 years to think in by the week or by the month or by the quarter. And today, when we think of revenue, we need to be clear. We have to have enough revenue in the short term for survival, but our future is long term.
That's exactly.
And so part of that transition from great regional manager to CRO is the recognition that what we really want is we want to win transactions today that are platforms for the next 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly right. So we have our core product. We want to protect that. We want to make sure we're not losing margins on it. But the organization cannot continue to live simply on the legacy products. And so they're going to be bringing to us products that they want represented in the marketplace. And we've got to be ready to analyze how we're going to do it, give it its value proposition, decide what buyer path it's going to flow through. So, let me give interesting 2 little phrases that kind of strikes me about chief revenue officers. There's one type of behavior called align, execute, and accomplish. This is all about execution excellence. It's about whatever we're doing, we're going to do it better. Okay. Yep. And then that's what all the emails are about. But there's a different value that I call challenge, discover, and change. And so that other drumbeat, which really gives us the forward-looking health of the revenue team, the revenue segment planning, the interactions with the product divisions, the confirmation by finance about how we're running our business. We need to step up. We need to step up and not be trapped into these day-to-day initiatives. So they'll never stop. There's a sales credit split problem. The pricing tool went down. And but if you're a chief revenue officer, you've got to step back. You got to step back and say, am I driving this car in the right direction? Because it's got a bigger footprint than simply today's issues. And again, if I came up through sales, everything's a day-to-day problem. I'm a sales manager, a day-to-day problem. I'm a district manager, a day-to-day problem. I'm a regional manager, day-to-day problem. I'm a vice president of sales. No, you're not going to be dealing with day-to-day problems all the time. And that's really, we need some headlights on this thing. We can't be just driving in the dark. So yeah, and it's very exciting. Let me introduce an interesting phrase that kind of came and went, but it's still being done. It was called Salesforce transformation. And remember that phrase that was really hot? Okay. Well, what really Salesforce transformation was correcting an obsolete sales department. Okay. So sales departments are either contemporary and aligned or they're obsolete. So this whole movement of Salesforce transformation was basically saying, oh my God, this isn't that like Antiques Roadshow or American Pickers. Man, you guys are running something from the 80s here. So Salesforce transformation is not an event. It really, if we take that word off and say we do forward planning and adjustments to our sales organization and our revenue team in a comprehensive fashion, we don't have to depend upon Salesforce transformation after we put our car in a ditch. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to slightly change the conversation because you just got me really excited. A lot of what we talk about is purpose. And we believe purpose is fundamental to an organization's culture. And that most businesses have one of two purposes. They're either completely focused on how do I make the most money possible in the shortest period of time, which is those examples of I'm a regional sales manager or a district sales manager, and I'm going to stay or go based on how much I create this month, this quarter, this year. The second business model purpose is we want to make a ton of money, but we believe the way we do that is by having a purpose bigger than just making money. It's making our community better, making our environment better, making our industry better. And in those two situations, you get different answers to those questions. Because if I'm in the second example, I'm here to make the world a better place while I make a ton of money, then I want to continuously improve because I'm trying to keep up with all the crazy changes in the world around me.
Yeah.
And I'm not as focused on the short-term answer. Maybe I make an extra dollar today, but that means next year I've got to resell this same thing over again, as opposed to having created a partner that I can count on to buy this and more again next year.
So let me pose a question to you. So purpose, so there's a construct known as tribalism. In other words, I belong to this organization and I want to make a difference. I want us to be making a difference. I want us to be part of a movement. Okay. I have an identity and it's just not an isolated one around my corporate experience of what producing revenue. But I think there's a bigger world that we're serving. Okay. So I'm going to call that a philosophical construct. Okay. And you might say, wow, why do you think that that's a good idea? And I would probably answer that question by saying it increases affiliation because people are like, wow, we're like members of something it's kind of important. Okay. But, and this is a big but, okay. I am a student of management models. Okay. And so we call that management model the institution mission management model. It says you're part of a greater whole, and we were going to bring quality products, improve people's lives. But there's competing. You mentioned the other one, results centric. We're here just to hit results. Okay. And you might say, well, that's kind of a shallow, but there are organizations that are very successful that are simply result centric. There's a couple of other models. There's the so-called customer-centric model. Well, what's the difference between that and a mission statement? Well, the guy that used to, I forget his name, the guy that used to run Southwest Airlines, he basically said, go ahead. What was his name? Yeah, Herb. So, he had a focus around customer experience, okay? But if I take then there's another model called execution excellence. If I take a look at UPS, and the Six Sigma people, they're all about, hey, it's a game. We're going to make more efficient, more efficient, more efficient. So I'm going to agree with you that I think that the mission sort of visionary affiliation model gets the most out of people. Okay. But these other models have validity too. And so I have on my bookshelf here, book after book about management theorems and management models. And the interesting thing that I learned is that they all work. Okay, you go, wait, David, wait a minute. Isn't one better than the other? I've been in enough companies to see them all work. Execution excellence, the so-called shareholder-centric organization, the customer-centric organization. I've even seen it where there's the producer-centric organization. We just hire killers like real estate people. And it raises a question to me. And then we have this big, I'm sorry, I'm going off track here a little bit from our sales organization, but we have these HR people showing up with all these various programs and things like that. And the thing that I've kind of learned, and I find that all of these models are valid. However, there are certain management systems that go with them. Okay. So, like I do a lot in sales compensation. Well, do you need to have a really aggressive sales compensation program if you have a person who's committed? Right. And that was my experience with one of the largest wine companies. And the person whose name is on the bottle says to me, your sales commission program kind of treats our people like mice running through a maze. And you know what? We're committed to them and they're committed to us. This is 26,000 employees. And you know what? That was his belief system. And you know what? He was right. In other words, the sales commission program would have been sort of at odds with the philosophy of the organization. So I'm going to respect that you have a vision about values and what the role of an organization should be, particularly in terms of aligning people from an affiliation point of view. But these other models have truth to them also. And so it's one of my side interests, and I continue to examine these. And it's amazing, book after book on this is the only way to manage people. You go, it can't be true. They're totally opposite, but both authors have, we did this at Facebook, or we were wonderful at UPS, or this is how Disney does it. And you go, something's not working here, because they all seem to be working. And I guess the ideal is that you have to commit to a model, and you can't be bringing in convoluted programs that doesn't match model. My 2 cents. So your point of view, your response to that.
Oh no, I think I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and good examples. I think you probably have read In Search of Excellence and certainly
Yes.
Good to Great. And when you read those books and they go after which models work, when you take a step back and you look at those books, by the time they were published, at least one of every one of the good or great companies were already in trouble or gone.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So our belief is that models work at a certain point.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you. And so let me share kind of a pattern that happens with revenue organizations. If I talk about the startup revenue organization, you know what? We don't know who to call on. Product management doesn't know either. We're kind of lost. And so we go into what's called a discovery culture. Don't worry about your title. Just go out and say something and see what works. Okay. So this so-called discovery phase has sort of market makers, and they kind of hopefully work together to kind of solve the problem. Okay. So that's, and then we're selling for survival here, folks, because if we don't bring some revenue in, phase 2 is we're geniuses. We figured out how to do this. And so now we're going to scale ourselves. So if we have 5 account managers, now we have 10. If we have 10, we go to 20. If we have 20, we go to 40. So we scale up, and very beneficially, a silo set of organizations, because you know what? We're geniuses. We figured it out. Then we saturate the market, and all of a sudden, all those silos are bumping into each other. And we start to say, wait a minute, not all business is good business, which is a very, very tough thing for a revenue, the revenue organization to accept. not all business is good business. And so only some business is good business. And so that creates a cultural revolution in the revenue organization. And then finally, the point of nirvana is that we start to realize that we have different revenue segments. Some of them are startup, some of them are scaling, some of them are flat, and some of them we need to optimize and maybe change how we go to market with them. So I'm a big fan in that sort of, life cycle changes to the revenue organizations. And David, is culture changing? I think so. I think so. You can hear it sometimes in these sort of saturated sales organizations. Gosh, you should have been here with us in the 70s. It was awesome. Remember that? We're growing fast. We're fantastic. We're the heroes. And now we're the goats because we're growing less than 10%. Okay. So I don't know. What's your thoughts about it?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, having been in the 70s and 80s, grew up in the CAD/CAM world and watched individuals who were fortunate enough to be assigned to Ford Motor or General Motors or Boeing look like heroes. They made tons of money. 5 years later, they couldn't get a job because they were incompetent.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's equally as true with organizations as it was with individuals. That if you're in the right place at the right time, you were a hero.
Yeah, yeah. So I need my revenue leader not to be trapped in a period of time that doesn't exist anymore. So if we're scaling, scale it, man. I mean, just keep loading it up and grow it. But if you're not growing, stop, ask the question, where is this going? And that happened in the pharmaceutical market. They kept adding salespeople to call on doctors. And eventually the doctor says, stop, because it was more is better, more is better, more is better, not more is better. Eventually they just overwhelmed the docs. And in addition to that, doctors lost their authority to make decisions to the IDNs, the organizations of hospitals and things like that. So all of a sudden we were left hanging with a bunch of salespeople that were no longer relevant to the buyer population.
So David, we could go all day. I can see this. I'm going to ask you the last question, and give your advice to whether it's CEOs or founders or owners or C-suite people about what they should be thinking about here in 2022 going forward. And then I'm going to ask you the same question about people just coming up in their career. What should they be thinking about?
Great.
So
if I was a business, let me go ahead.
Yeah, just advice to those two groups.
Okay. So if I was a business owner, one of the confusing things, I can get it organized around my finance. I can get my production people, execution excellence. I can improve my supply chains. And then I look at the revenue organization, I'm thinking, what are they doing and why are they doing that? And in fact, I may have been a salesperson at one time myself as a GM, and why don't they do it like I do it? And I think an executive needs to pause a second and say, look, the revenue organization is an evolving and organic organization. I don't need Action Jackson people in there. And that's really a distraction. Hey, how's it going? Oh, it's going great. We're calling this customer, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what? I need somebody who can plan the future of the revenue organization. I need to have them ask us and themselves and the market, where's the opportunity? And then I need them to step up with the resources. And it's just not always a salesperson. It might be digital engagement. And I need them to think broadly about where they're taking this extremely expensive population of digital tools, people, staff, overhead, and tell me where you're taking it. I want to see your 1-year plan. I want to see your 3-year plan. And I want to see your 5-year plan. And let me tell you what I'm not looking for. I'm not looking for the products down the left-hand side and the months across the top and you telling me that's your plan. That's not a plan. I need to know what you're going to be doing with the health of this revenue organization. So I would suggest that leaders kind of hold their revenue executives accountable for being strategic, for
Yeah,
being planful, for looking into the future. And that's what I would encourage them to do. Show me the money. That's what I would say.
excellent. And it sounds like that's very much what your book is about.
Yeah, that's what. And the book. If I was, a general manager, okay, the book is chock full of content, but I would look at the broader model and I would ask my revenue leader, so what are we doing about value propositions? Tell me what you're thinking about revenue segments. I mean, the book goes into detail, charts and all sorts of stuff, but they're just simple questions. Tell me why the organization is structured the way it is and what are you trying to accomplish? And how's that going to get at the population of customers and the types of products that we're selling?
Amen. So what's your advice now to somebody early in their career and they're trying to land in that place that, makes them happy and makes them a good living?
So I'm a big believer. A career of lifetime learning is really the ambition. I think anybody coming up, whether you're a first-time seller, you're a district manager, you're a regional manager, or you're in charge of the digital engagement or the e-commerce, or whether you're customer service. And I basically would say, you have in your job, you should divide your time up this way. 70% should be doing, okay? And that is, you got a lot of day-to-day things that just got to be done. So allocate 70% of your time to getting things done. Then set aside 20% of your time to improving what you're doing, okay? And that means getting additional resources, helping people. And then the last 10%, I want you building your own portfolio. I want you to look into the future. I want you to be able to get mentors that can talk to you about your next vision and what you should be learning. You should have books. You should be reading about what great sales organizations and revenue organizations do. So 70, 20, 10, 70% executing, 20% improving what you're doing, and 10% building your portfolio of how you can bring greater value to your organization.
I love it. I love it. I wish somebody told me that 40 years ago, 50 years ago now. So, David, this has been great. Any last words for us?
I'm so amazed by our chief revenue officers. There are so many people doing so many great things, and I'm very optimistic. And I have a word of advice. You don't need to go whale watching or purchase something. You need to educate yourself, and the information's available. The information's available how to do things well. And so I'm very optimistic that we who are responsible for revenue of the company can bring value, clarity, organization, planning to our revenue responsibilities. I'm very positive about it.
Well, thank you very much. This has been great. I'm glad to have you with us today. And, maybe we'll get to do it again.
Well, Rick, thanks a lot for inviting me. As you can see, I just love the subject, and it's, everything's learnable. There's nothing here that is magic or you have to have worked for another company all this stuff is learnable and you can be great at it. So thanks a lot, Rick, and thanks to your podcast audience.
Well, and for the audience, thanks for joining us. We do this 2 times a month. So hopefully we'll see you for the next one. Thanks.